All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Try Swim Coach podcast. Weird day today. Lissa's out sick, so you're stuck with me. This is my first solo episode ever, so let's see if I can carry this thing without awkwardly talking to myself for about 20 minutes or so. I figured if I'm going to ramble, I might as well talk about something I actually know, breathing and swimming. Turns out a lot of people kind of suck at it, and it's not really their fault. Our instincts in the water are kind of all wrong. So today, I'm going to be breaking it down. Why you're probably overthinking it, how to breathe without feeling like you're drowning, and a very simple drill that might just change everything for you. Before we get into the podcast, please share this episode with all of your friends that need help breathing better as they swim. If you don't have any friends, share it with your dog or your cat. All right, let's get in the episode before I start gasping for air myself. All right, so weird day today. Tried to podcast, but my most amazing co-host, Lissa, isn't feeling well. So I'm doing a Solocast. This is my first time ever doing a solo podcast. So I figured for today, I'm going to talk about things that I absolutely would consider myself knowledgeable in and what's going to help people get better. And to me, the most important thing that someone can understand or improve on and work on in swimming of any kind is their breathing. So I wanted to take today's podcast to just talk about breathing, obviously the importance of breathing, and maybe some other things that are centered around breathing while swimming. I went down a breathing rabbit hole from basically 2015 to now. I'm still going down that breathing rabbit hole because learning about breathing does seem sort of like infinite. There are lots of things to cover when it comes to breathing in general on land or just in life versus breathing in swimming. One of the most important things in my mind to kind of always keep in the back of your mind as you're working on your breathing as you swim is the mechanisms that we use on land to breathe are the same exact mechanisms that we use in the water to breathe. The only difference is that there's a timing issue in the water, meaning we have to know that our hip has rotated upward first before we can turn our head to breathe. So that means we have to wait on our hip, and then we actually have to turn our head. Both of those things take time. So unlike when you're running, you can just exhale and inhale. So in swimming, we have to be prepared that there's a timing sequence that's a part of our breathing pattern. And that's it. All right. Everything else is pretty much the same on land as it is in the water. One of the issues that confuse people in breathing while they're swimming is the instinct to hold their breath. I'm saying it's an instinct. I don't actually know it's an instinct. Well, I know it's an instinct for infants, right? As an infant, infants will hold their breath while submerged, I think, up to 5 or 6 times. And after that amount of times, maybe on the 7th time, that instinct goes away and the infant might actually inhale while underwater. Now, as an adult, I still think for a lot of people, there's an instinct to hold their breath once they're submerged. And that's the opposite of what we should be focusing on. Just like if you started running, the first thing you did after you took your first step wouldn't be to take a breath and hold it. But for a lot of athletes, that's the first thing that they do. They push off before they even push off the wall, they take in a breath, they hold their breath, and then they push, and they keep holding their breath versus exhaling. Now, for whatever reason, there's a couple of different reasons or whys. We don't need to go down that path. But for whatever reason, our bodies have a hard time feeling the difference between hyperventilation and hypoxia. They are the exact opposites, but they feel very similar to one another. And I would even say it's pretty hard to discern while you're swimming if you're taking in too much air or not getting enough air. Basically, your body gives you the same signal, which is I need to release this CO2 and get in new air. So a lot of the times people have it in their like brain or just because of the instinct to hold their breath that if they get more air, they will feel better. But in actuality, getting rid of the air will make them feel better. Maybe it's fear that if I get rid of this air, I won't be able to get more air back in, which is legitimate to have that fear. But you can only hold your breath for so long before your body needs to get rid of all of the waste that that first breath or that first inhalation has created. So when we're swimming, freestyle specifically, since we're going to talk about freestyle as like the basis of swimming, I ask people to be mindful that they don't let all of their air out. So a good rule is to try to maintain what you perceive of 40 to 60% of your lung capacity. This is all perception, right? There's no way for us to measure this while you're swimming, but you should absolutely not be getting rid of all of your air. Going back to what I said earlier, just like on land, your breath is the same when you swim. So think about when you run. If you're running, would you blow all of your air out? Maybe every once in a while, you just kind of got to take a deep breath in and a big breath out just to like clear your mind, clear your thoughts, kind of whatever. But ultimately, you're really breathing a very short breath and not all of your air is being exhaled when you do that. Well, it's the same thing in swimming, and it's even more important in swimming in that your lungs are basically internal buoys that keep you afloat. So if you're blowing all of your air out, not only are you going to not have enough air to swim, but you're going to make yourself sink, which now causes more drag, which means now you're having to work harder, which means you need more oxygen to do the same task. So it is a vicious cycle of if I let all my air out, I start to sink, I have to work harder. Working harder makes me have to need more oxygen, so then I try to take a bigger breath, and then it doesn't work. So when we take breaths in swimming, it should be about what your heart rate is determining you need to breathe. For some reason, we get in the water, we start thinking about breathing, and we don't let it happen naturally. And probably because swimming is unnatural. I agree. For everyone out there who's like, swimming is unnatural, agreed, 100%. It is not natural to us. Waiting for your hip to turn and then turning your head in order to take that breath in is also kind of unnatural. Like I have to add these steps before I can actually get more air, right? So knowing how much air you're going to let out helps kind of figure how much air you're going to take in. Breaths should be somewhat small and casual. One of my favorite drills, breathing drills for swimming is to take just a tiny sip of water that just fills up the bottom of your mouth. Try to take in a gentle breath so that the air travels over that water and doesn't create a mist or vapor. If you can do that, that's how we would take in air as we swim. Basically, as you're swimming, you will always have water in your mouth. And if you don't have water in your mouth, you're probably doing something not quite right. And so you should get used to the idea that you have to take a breath with water in your mouth. And what does that breath feel like? Because it can't be a very quick inhalation. It has to be like a casual, gentle inhalation so that you don't suck up all that water that's in your mouth. Keeping that in mind, I try to give the image of when we breathe in swimming, we're really sort of like taking a snack of breath. We're not going to the buffet and trying to fill up with breath. So breath rate happens when you run at about, I'll look it up. I think it's about 1 second to 2 seconds. Let's see. This is where having a co-host really helps get this figured out. So obviously speaking, the faster you're running, your heart rate is going up, your breath rate is going to increase. So here's a chart. Let's see what this chart says. So let's see. This is a very interesting looking chart. If you're, not a helpful chart. Let's see if I can find something that's a little bit more helpful. I'm sure this is really boring. Basically, you're taking a breath every 1 to 2 seconds when you run. So we should be taking a breath every 1 to 2 seconds when we swim. The good news is most people's stroke cycles, or stroke rate, cadence, should be about either 60 strokes per minute, which would be on the slower end, to somewhere around maybe 74 strokes per minute, which would be on the very fast cadence end. So if we're taking a breath rate somewhere around 65 strokes per minute, that means basically you're getting a breath, if you breathe every other stroke, around every 2 seconds or so, which is kind of very similar to running. So heart rate determines breath rate, not what your preference is. Meaning some coaches, some athletes will say, well, I prefer to breathe every 3. And that's great. Breathe every 3 if that's what you like. However, if you try to breathe every 3 strokes and you are increasing your effort, you will put yourself into oxygen debt. And once you're in oxygen debt and you're swimming, it's pretty hard to get yourself out of oxygen debt. So if you are swimming and you're breathing every 3 strokes and you feel like you're not getting enough air, maybe you're swimming at a higher level of effort than you should be for that number of breath rate. So if you want to keep that same pace, start breathing every other stroke. If you want to keep the same cadence of breath, slow your pace down and see if you then feel better breathing every 3. But there will be a limiting factor breathing every 3 and getting to your, we'll say, higher effort zones. All right. So keeping that in mind is really important. The breath rate is about the same as when you're running. And I love to ask people to do a little experiment when they run. Basically, this is the thought. Lungs don't like vacuums. So if you blow your air out really quickly, you will reflexively inhale. So the inhalation becomes automatic, which is really important to think about. You probably don't think about inhaling air when you're running. It's fairly automatic for you. So once you're about 20 minutes into a run, that's about when most people are warmed up, is 20 minutes in, do an experiment and see if you forcibly exhale while you run, can you hold your breath at the end of that forced exhale? If your heart rate is around 70 to 75% effort or greater, you will not be able to hold your breath after that exhalation. Your body will reflexively force you to inhale. And experiencing this is sort of enlightening. It gives you the idea or the understanding that when you're in the water and you're swimming and you're working at 70, 75% effort or greater, your exhalation can be sort of staccato, is the way I like to describe it, a very forced exhalation. And so then you automatically inhale. I think the hardest part about figuring out how to breathe while we swim freestyle is knowing how much to take in. But if you don't think about it, your body will do it automatically. And there is a lot of we'll say a long learning curve here. Experience goes a long way. The more you attempt, the more often you really focus on your breathing, the better it will get. If you start to get frustrated as you focus on your breathing, then back off a little bit, because once you're frustrated, it's never going to go well, basically. So don't get frustrated with yourself. Give yourself some grace, but be also mindful of maybe how hard you're working is affecting how you breathe. Maybe you're working harder than you should be. If you are, you've got to learn how to swim slow. And swimming slow is a lot harder than people think it is. Swimming fast gives us momentum, and that momentum provides lift and balance for us. So it's easier to actually take a breath as we swim fast. Swimming slow, you lose some of that balance, you lose some of that lift, so you're lower to the surface of the water. And so then your timing has to be really good, and the movements have to be really good. And when I say timing, I mean the timing of the movements of your body, your hip rotating in your head, but then also the timing of when are you exhaling and when are you inhaling. Those are also timing issues that we have to overcome when we talk about breathing in freestyle. So the difficulty with learning how to improve your breathing in freestyle is there are a lot of little pieces to bring together. One of the goals is to be able to swim maybe a length of a pool on just one exhale. If you can do that, you either have a great lung capacity or you are swimming in a low effort way that you're not using a lot of oxygen, and you can just exhale almost the entire 25 yards or meters. I don't necessarily want anyone to do that, but you should be able to do it. And if you can learn how to exhale with your face under the water, learning how to inhale is much easier. So a big issue that people have is, how do I actually exhale under the water? And there is more than one way to do it. So you can exhale almost exclusively through your nose if you want. Your nose is a smaller valve, so to speak, than your mouth compared to your mouth. So less air is going to travel out of that less quickly, right? So it does take more effort to push that air out because it is a smaller valve. Now, there's using your mouth exclusively, where you can exhale from your mouth and obviously inhale from your mouth. By the way, shouldn't have to say this, but I'm saying it. We never inhale through our nose while we swim, at least not intentionally, okay? Never inhale through your nose while you swim. It is a great way to drown and to really hate swimming. So you can use your mouth to exhale. You can use your mouth to inhale. You can use your nose to exhale, but you can never use your nose to inhale. The other option, the third option, is a little bit of your nose and your mouth, which should be somewhat natural or automatic in that, like, most of the time I blow out of my mouth. I also blow some air out of my nose. I prefer to blow air out of my mouth because I do know air is coming out of my nose as well. But I'm typically working around 70% effort or greater when I'm swimming. And so it's easier for me to get my 40% of my lung capacity out quickly in a burst through my mouth and back in almost reflexively or automatically, because I had a sort of staccato, explosive type breath. I don't ever think about inhaling. It just happens automatically for me. This can happen for you too. It will just take time. You will just have to experience the failures of this as well as some of the successes before you actually can kind of put it all together. Keep that in mind. I don't know anyone who succeeded in improving their swimming or improving their breathing without failing at it first. So be okay with being bad at breathing. You're going to fail. I mess up my breathing still to this day. I have to make sure I time the turn of my head correctly. I have to make sure that I bring my face back in the water before my recovering arm passes my shoulder line. And every once in a while, I play a game with myself to make sure I don't see more than past the lane rope when I'm swimming. So if I turn my head to the side to breathe, I only want to see maybe an inch above the lane rope. Anything more than that, I'm picking my head up to help me breathe. And I don't need to do that. So I've been doing this for a very long time. Those are still things that I have to circle around and think about as I swim. And I'm only telling everyone this to reassure you that breathing is hard. You will always have to think about it, but hopefully you will think less and less and less about it. And when you do think about it in the future, it's more about just refining what you know instead of outright changing what you know or outright learning something new. Okay? So we're really just focused on how much air we let out, making sure we do let air out, waiting to turn our head before we turn our hips. How do we get rid of that air? Is it through your nose? Is it through your mouth? Is it through both? I would say if you're breathing every 3 strokes, breathe out through your nose so that you can control the flow more easily. If you're breathing every other stroke, you might need to breathe out through your mouth so you can get rid of the air faster. My preference as a swimmer is to breathe every other stroke, mostly to my left side, because that's the side I like to breathe to. But that doesn't mean that I can't switch whenever I want. I can switch to my right side whenever I want. If I want to switch to 3 or 5 or 4 or 8 strokes, I can do it on a dime, on a whim, whenever I want. So even though I have preferences, woof! Even though I have preferences, that doesn't mean I don't do the things that I need to do, right? I need to work on breathing every 3. I work on that. I need to work on breathing every 6 or 8 or 7. I do those things. So when a situation arises that I need to use those skills, I have them in the bag. So I don't want anyone to take this as don't breathe every 3, only breathe every other. That's not what I'm talking about. None of the things that we do in swimming are set in stone, especially in open water. Nothing is set in stone. You're going to be met with lots of situations in the open water. You need to be prepared for all of them, which I'll bring this point up. When it's choppy open water, chop is usually occurring because of wind. So it's the surface of the water is being lifted. So if you work on your breathing, really focus on trying to keep, I'm going to say, the crown of your head. If you were wearing a swim cap, the seam of your cap should just be below the surface of the water when you turn your head to breathe. Keeping your head low in a regular pool, regular swimming scenario helps when you experience chop, because most beginners' instinct is to try to breathe above the chop, which means they would have to pick their head up to take that breath, which is never going to work. So you've got to learn to keep your head down and almost get your head to bore through the base of the chop. And hopefully, and that's if the chop is head on. If the chop is coming from your left side, well, you breathe to the right side. If the chop is coming from your right side, you breathe to the left side. No big deal. But if you can't breathe to both sides, you're going to have an issue in the open water. So it's not a requirement to swim open water, but it certainly is helpful to be able to breathe to both sides and be able to change whenever you need to change. That's why it's so important to practice both sides versus it is not important to bilateral breathe. Have the skill, but know if you bilateral breathe, it does affect what your heart rate is trying to do if you're working harder or not. Things to keep in mind. Where are we at? How long have we been going on this podcast? Longer than I thought. 21 minutes basically of me talking. Seems like enough. This was a good start, I think, to talk about the breath. It is very complicated. It's very hard to talk about sort of openly like this, where there's probably a ton of questions going through somebody's head right now that they can't ask. So if you have any questions, leave a comment, ask me some questions. I'd be happy to help. If you want some help with your breathing work, we have a really, I think, easy to follow breathing crash course. I'll leave in the description of this podcast. It has been amazing to see how this little course has helped so many people improve their breathing, and it's only $14 and some change. So anyway, check out the breathing course. If you have questions about breathing, hit me up. I'm happy to help. Until the next time, I'll talk to you later.